Okay, it is June the 11th, 2018, still June the 11th, and I'm my friend, colleague Ray Burkhart. Dr. Raymond Burkhart is here. We've been talking about his career and how he approaches playing, and now we're going to go more into the endurance and upper register aspect of it. So if you're going to teach endurance and upper register, which you have accomplished yourself beautifully, what do you think about? How do you teach? What is it? We just talked about it.
Yeah,
keeping things steady as you go from low to high.
It's like buying a house. There's three important points, right? Location, location, location.
Right.
I think with endurance and range, it's all about efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And there are trumpet players who will try to play high on equipment that just isn't suited for that.
Mm-hmm.
There are players who think small is an answer to high, but they're not able to really control the trumpet. They get something that's too small, and then when they do play high, it may sound kind of not appealing, or it might just be way out of tune. And their ears may... I'm talking about me when I was in high school.
Right.
You know, I didn't kind of realize maybe that the payoff for playing the smaller mouthpiece for me at that time was that I really wasn't able to control my pitch. Well, in high school, you can't tell because I was playing better in tune than the next guy. But then you get to college, you get where the ramifications are more important, and all of a sudden you realize, you can't control your pitch. You're way sharp in the upper range. So finding a balance was one of the lessons I learned somewhere along the way after. I mean, not that you and I didn't work on it, but the critical day was a lesson I had with Roy Popper one time, and that was really, really, really important.
Roy Popper is now teaching at Oberlin.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
player.
And so that was, that helped me get to where I was on the right balance.
What did he say?
I had shown up for this lesson, and I was an hour before he got there. And I did all this work and all this warming up, and I was playing all the way to double C's and all this stuff. I thought, I'm ready to go. He's going to hear me play really well. And then he gets me and says, hey, let's go get some coffee. So we put the trumpet down and go, finally come back. And I'm stone cold when he comes back.
Nice.
And I had no flexibility and I had no range, which was part and parcel of this whole on and off again thing,
right.
Which was at that point still plaguing me a little bit. He looked at my equipment, whatever it was, I don't recall. And he says, how do you expect to play with that kind of, not just high, I mean, it's not just high note worship, but with that kind of range, that kind of flexibility on a piece that's that big. And I mean, I don't want to do any disservice to him in any way. It was one of the most important lessons I've ever had.
Right.
And
he did help me a lot too. I just asked him one question one time. We worked a lot together in the alley opera and the chamber orchestra, and I thought, well, I'd pick his brain. If I said, there's one thing that I can do that I should change, what would it be? And he said, as you go higher, try to keep your chops in the same position,
Right.
And so it was very helpful, just that little observation.
Other people have certainly talked about this.
Right.
I mean, most players specialize in something. They're orchestral type players, they're commercial jazz type players, lead and all that. And both have completely different needs. If you're someone like me who plays both, then you don't want to have both feet in the big camp or both feet in the small camp. You've got to get down the middle somewhere.
Right.
And that was, and at the time, and still, I've always been called upon to play orchestral type stuff, real legit brass stuff, this and that, then a show, or a Latin band or a big band. I don't do as much of that now, but I used to do a lot more. And so I always keep a couple extra things in my case, something to go really small if I got to do 4 hours of Latin.
Rob McGregor used to have a funny saying that he would say that security is knowing there's another mouthpiece in your case that's smaller than the one you're playing on.
Right.
So I remember that.
Well, he was my teacher after you, so I've learned that one. And then, and I always have something bigger, because you show up to something, all of a sudden you're playing, third trumpet on some John Williams stuff, and you need to honk out some low notes, or Wagner on something on a rotary trumpet, who knows what. And you have to have more space than this gives me. So...
But this is mouthpieces, your standard.
Yeah, and I played on the piccolo too. People talk about switching for other instruments. I don't switch it for almost anything, unless I go way extreme, having to play big band stuff, or way extreme, having to play really low.
Right. So
anyway,
you're talking about efficiency.
Efficiency.
And how does one get efficiency? I've heard that used before.
By not wasting effort. I can remember the days when I'd show up on a big band and I'd play the first two sets, and on the third hour I'd start getting tired like crazy. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. And then
I can't really. No, because I would get tired after the first set.
And then some people wouldn't recognize, and I started to recognize this too, that I get back to normal in the fourth set. Well, if I was really tired out on the third, why am I getting a second win on the fourth? Anyway.
Yes, that's interesting.
It is, but yeah, a lot of people recognize that.
Yeah.
I just have found, again, over all these years, that if you do anything that wastes energy, then you tire yourself out. And so if you play the thing we talked about in the last session about a little motion that you make or a twitch or a thing, well, now you're working harder. One of the worst things to do is to play sharp.
Right.
So you play off the center of the pitch.
Right. Good point.
And so here you're on a tuning C and you're maybe a little bit sharp, and no one notices, not even you.
Good point.
Then you go up to a G, and you take how much sharp you were on the C, and you go sharper, and you add it to where you started. Now you're pretty high on the G.
Right.
And then you go to high C, and you only want to go fourth. Well, if you go perfect fourth, from being too sharp, guess where you are? You're too sharp. Plus, the reality is you're going sharper because you're playing in that way.
And what happens, of course, when you're already sharp, you're trying to force the note into being in tune in the center of the sound.
And that is tiring.
Right.
And you're trying to put a note out the horn where the horn doesn't want to put it there. You know, the horn, actually the sound reflects back off the bell. And if it isn't in sync with what's going out, you have a bad problem. So if you're playing sharp, you are actually working really hard against yourself, your tone, your endurance, and you're insofar as you're trying to put a note where the horn doesn't want to put it, you're working against yourself in terms of range.
Good.
So if the one thing you're able to do is to play down the center more, then instead of thinking you need to be a bigger gorilla, go work out more and get bigger muscles to play your F's and G's and beyond. If you just pull the pitch down, and not to where you're pulling it down all the time, that would be really tiring, but where your natural set, where you learn to play in tune, then all of a sudden the energy you were putting into a high F plays a high G instead. Or something like that. And beyond. See, that's the best way to add range, is to clean up your playing.
Right. And it goes back to that area you talked about earlier. Well, we'll tell where you mentioned about just playing from a position of strength. That goes for pitch as well too. I mean, if you're playing well in tune, then you have a much better shot at. Anyway, do you have any exercises that you talk about? We're playing in tune or anything like that? I mean, how does that happen? It's one thing to talk about it.
When I work with students, I have them play, and you can tell, I can tell, at least I think I can tell pretty soon right off the bat, whether they're playing sharp on the slot or not. And then, like the other things, you have to find out what's contributing to that. It may be that it's some kind of equipment thing, but mostly you can play in tune. Unless you have a super small mouthpiece, then all of a sudden that does tend to really make you play really sharp. But if you're at all, in the ballpark on something, then it's all about the player, and they usually just don't know they're doing it. It comes out of years of trying to play high, and doing it wrong, and summoning actually more energy than they need to do it.
And I use a tuner. I will use this TE tuner, which is an amazing tuner. TE tuner. You can download the app. But I find, especially with younger players who have trouble hearing, does quantitative differences between the pitches that it helps if they can visualize, and then they can hopefully eventually they'll be.
Yeah, using a tuner is really helpful if you don't use it the wrong way. It's very hard to get a student to play honestly.
You can use it as a crutch.
Well, if you're looking at the tuner and trying to play in tune and adjusting everything, you're not learning how you really play. Anyway.
Good point.
You do a whole session on tuners,
how
to use them. But so no, as soon as I realize that they're out of tune, either using a tuner.
Can you give us an example of playing something that's out of tune? Just go for like an arpeggio, and what it would sound like, and then how you fix it, play it in tune, and what did you do to change it?
Okay. Here's what I would say a lot of players do. Lifting that with your lower lip a little bit, or both lips.
You can hear it.
You can hear that, but they play that. They've always played that way. They've learned to play that way, so they don't know they're doing it.
Yeah.
That's the challenge in teaching, is getting someone to realize that they're actually doing something. they shouldn't do.
That's
And that's really hard because they've always played that way. But I've had a lot of students. They come in, they're playing out here somewhere, and they're good players. They have good ranges, but they could have better. And when they do have better, I don't know if you can see that tuning slide's an inch and a half out. And as they get better and better, and meaning as they play more in tune, that slide comes in, and their pitch is better. I mean, well, they're still playing in tune with people, but they're playing better range, better sound, much more efficiently, and much more endurance.
Right, and I think a side benefit of that is you have more control over the sound. So if you're in a group where the pitch is getting a little weird, you can adjust that without having to move your slide because you have developed.
Which happens all the time at the highest level.
Right.
Because you have to tune with the flutes all of a sudden.
That's right.
And you're tuning, so you're always doing it with the lips in a professional situation.
Right, exactly.
But, yeah.
So when you say you're playing efficiently, I keep going back to that because that's one of my things that I think I don't play as efficiently as I should. What does that mean? I know, and you talked about playing in tune and making it more efficient that way. Do you think about breathing or the breath aspect, or whether it's a fast air or slow air or anything like that?
I have been through, I think, all of the things that you can be through on everything on the trumpet. I never actually bought the mirror that you can attach to the lead pipe. That was only because I couldn't afford it. I've gone with the pencil in the mouth, and I'm really not going to knock anything because all those are ways of doing something.
Right.
But I've tried everything. I think I've heard mostly everything. But one of the you've got a beautiful picture up here on your wall of important people of Manny Klein.
Right.
And
Manny Klein was a great studio here in Los Angeles for many
years. You were very close to him, and through you, I got to meet him. I got to meet him through Claude Gordon first.
Right.
And so I asked him that one time. I asked him something about that. And he said, Claude, and again, he was big on breathing. I did all kinds of breathing exercises.
Right.
I've probably never in my life had the breath control and power that I had when I was a senior in high school or a freshman in college.
Right.
But he said, Who
said?
Manny.
Yeah.
He said, this is my theory on breathing. If you don't breathe, you die. So breathe.
And you know where he got that?
I don't know.
He got it from Schlossberg.
Oh, yeah?
He asked Schlossberg one time, he says, what about the breathing? And that's what Schlossberg said.
Right.
So he
said, so if you're studying with someone, they have this big philosophy of breathing, knock yourself out.
Yeah, I really like the breathing gym. I think that's a great little video series.
All kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But there's other players I've talked about who you just breathe.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, there are a ton of people who don't breathe well, and then they need some help and they need some specifics.
Right. From John Lewis, I got this power lung device, and John recommended I get this, and it has been very helpful. It's a very interesting. You can check it out, power lung. And,
cool.
And you also have the breath builder, which I keep around here. It's another good. Anyway. Go ahead.
Yeah. So
all these things.
For me, I just don't use any of that stuff anymore.
Right.
I've probably tried it all.
Right.
I think.
So what do you think about when you're breathing then?
I didn't breathe.
You just breathe. Like Manny says, if you don't breathe, you'll die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds a little.
Now, so what? But is there a difference between, say, playing piccolo trumpet and playing the B flat trumpet, like a lead trumpet part or something like that?
Oh yeah. Well, that's in how you use your breath, not in actually how you breathe.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's how you use your breath.
Yeah. Playing lead, you take I always like to take a big comfortable breath, and then you have to bear down a good bit, a lot of compression and all that stuff. If you move a lot of air.
Right.
But if you're playing in the same range and sometimes even higher on piccolo, you need to have a ton of compression and an eensy-teensy-weensy small amount of air. And some players don't really figure that out. I remember when I hadn't figured that out.
They try to play their pick like a bighorn.
Yeah. I remember I used to try to do that, and I got into my first job playing piccolo, and the guys looked over at me and said, "Hey, Ray, tone that down, will you?" Oh, okay. You mean playing that way in a church with a ton of acoustic, with a handful of strings, playing as loud as I can on the piccolo is not what you want to hear?
But you made a name for yourself.
Well, there was a day when that came as a surprise to me. But no, you have to play talk about efficiency. To go in the upper range on the piccolo from any note to any note, you can't sort of force it. It's got to be. It's like cutting diamonds, I imagine. it has to be very, very precise.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, trumpet playing is, and that's why you asked earlier in one of the earlier sessions whether I can do one to the other. Mm-hmm. And as far as I'm concerned, for the most part, I can go from one to the other,
right,
like turning a page in a book,
right,
because I have my ways of doing things,
right,
which are not mine. I mean, everyone can do it.
Right.
But I remember Malcolm McNabb once told me, he says, play all gigs you get. Play in the Hawaiian bands, play in this, get it stylistically comfortable in any situation.
Right.
Now that's just style, but style includes technique. Because
right,
you have to learn how to play the piccolo, or how to play the flute, or how to play this or that, the other thing in certain situations.
Right.
And that does involve a knowledge of technique.
All right, so that concludes, wow, we're really doing well here today. This is part 3. We'll take a break. And so I think next, I want to hear you play a little bit. We'll do a little bit of maybe piccolo or something like that, and we can play a little bit of lick or something like that and show us how you approach playing different instruments. Don't go away, there's more.